Mitch McConnell, he doesn't believe black people are Americans. Here's what he said.
What's your message for voters of color who are concerned that without the John L. Lewis Voting Rights Act, they're not going to be able to vote in the midterm?
Well, the concern is misplaced because if you look at the statistics, African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans.
You heard it, right? African Americans are voting just as at high percentage as Americans because in his mind, black folk are not Americans. That's called a Freudian slip. He was thinking it, and I be damned. He'd have messed around and said it out loud. That's what went down. That's what you saw, okay? So let's start from that premise. He's factually inaccurate as it relates to voting. There are pockets that increase, pockets that decrease based on the legislation presented. The issue with voting in America cannot always be the narrative that somehow, well, you know, it's better than the 60s. That's like saying, well, if only 5 people get lynched this year, it's better than what happened in 1965. You shouldn't be okay with it, is my point. Under no circumstance should you be okay with restrictions to the ballot. His surrogate had this to say.
As I listened to the president talk about the importance of stopping what he characterized as Jim Crow 2.0, I felt frustration and irritation rising in my souls as I keep hearing the references to Jim Crow. I asked myself how many Americans understand what Jim Crow was. I am so thankful that we are not living in those days. But just for those who don't appreciate the Jim Crow that was, it was a time when my grandfather, born in 1921, would have experienced it if he was still alive. He could tell the stories of the Jim Crow South and the Jim Crow era.
Tim Scott is such a disappointment. Now, he's a surrogate for some BS. And I'm sure on some level he realizes this. But let's be very clear about Jim Crowism in the United States of America. Jim Crow did not always have a racial element connected to the statute. You know, when Jim Crowism said black folks need to count jelly beans in a jelly bean jar, or do a math equation, or read a paragraph, that did not say only for black folk in the statute. That was simply utilized in order to dissuade black voters. When they tell you you cannot hand water or refreshments to someone standing in a long line, they make that illegal. And then 98% of the precincts that have long lines historically are in black communities. They want to make it uncomfortable for black folk to participate. They do not want to make it convenient for black folk, brown folk, and historically marginalized groups to participate. You know why? Because they don't have solutions for those groups. If they had solutions and remedies for those demographics, they would want those demographics to participate in high numbers, but they don't. Here's what Senator Booker said.
Don't lecture me about Jim Crow. I know this is not 1965. That's what makes me so outraged. It's 2022. And they're blatantly removing more polling places from the counties where black and Latinos are overrepresented. I'm not making that up, that is a fact. I'm not gonna stop because I'm tired of hearing that this does not have to do about singling out certain populations in our country, students, Native Americans, and not others. I'm not accusing anybody. Please, let's not throw around the defense where we crouch into defensive postures. I'm not accusing anybody of being racist. I'm just speaking to the facts in our country that I know motivate everybody here.
I love my dear brother enough to tell him the truth. I've had him on my radio show. He's actually co-hosted on my radio program. So I know Senator Booker. But here are the mistakes you're making, Senator. One, you know good and damn well it's racist. Call it out. Stop being afraid of it. All right? Number two, don't be afraid to say black. I get it. Other groups are included in that, but don't be afraid to say black, brother. Don't be afraid of that. Because if you start talking like that, you have allowed them to win the messaging arena. You know how many people are now afraid to say woke, and they are woke? No, that's not a bad term. I'm proud to be woke. I'm happy to be woke. Don't let them hijack the message away from you, because you would then internalize your own expression and not be as powerful as you could be. Now, truth don't matter who tell it, okay? And that goes across the board for everybody. We all know this is rooted in racism. We know the bigotry of racism, sexism is in application here. And if we continue to act as if it is something other than that, we have allowed them to win at least one part of the messaging war to properly identify what they're doing. Senator, thoughts?
I mean, the points that Senator Booker did make, which is pretty much how dare you, this is the 21st century. And you guys still talking about the 20th century and the 19th century. We should want to and ought to be better in the 21st century than we were in the 20th century, the 19th century, and so on and so forth. So I love that part. I love the little fire. Yeah. And add that to what you just said, Doc, was a beautiful thing. These folks know exactly what they're doing in state houses all across the country. Republican legislators are introducing pieces of legislation that do not expand and protect access to the ballot box while keenly targeting those communities that have been disenfranchised historically, and that has been black folks. Hello, somebody. Yep. And then we put brown folks and students and people with other abilities, et cetera, working class people from across the spectrum. They are making it harder, starting with what they've done since the inception of this country, which is black folks. So we need to be able to go ahead and say that, Doc, and let's deal with it. Let's deal with it.
Well said. Well said.